Hey everyone, let's talk about line art. My name is Matt Campbell, and today I want to show you how to add more depth to your line art. So let's get started. All right, so the first thing that I want to talk about is line weight. Line weight is the thickness of a line, and you can use line weight to depict depth. Essentially, things that are closer to us are going to have thicker lines, and things that are farther away are going to have thin lines. Particularly the contour of a thing. But some lines that are farther off in the distance, like mountains and stuff, can be so thin that they're even starting to break. Now, in this example on the screen, I'm using some really amazing art by Langdon Foss. Langdon is an amazing artist, and I love his work. He's got a very Mobius style. But like Mobius, I feel personally that the line art is not designed to stand alone. It requires color to complete it. So when you look at this image, all the line art starts to sort of mesh together, and I've purposely zoomed out this image to kind of exaggerate that point. So nothing really stands out. Our eye doesn't really focus on anything, and we have to start looking around very carefully. So line weight is where you just start to outline things that are closer to us. So I've done that here. Come on, there we go. And you can see, even without zooming in, that this heavier line weight separates it from the background. Down here, even though this is a smaller image, you should still be able to see this. We have a beautiful one-point perspective illustration and this character, running down here. But all the line art that's up here as well as back here is pretty much the same line width. And so while I was outlining the guy above with this, I also added just a little bit of line weight on some of these lines right here to give it just that little bit more depth, telling us that these things are closer together. It's very subtle, but it can do a lot to depict depth. Now, something I'm going to be talking about later is spotting shadow areas and spot blacks and whatnot, but one of the things that happens when you don't do any line art weights or line weight or spot blacks is that things tend to not stand out. For instance, these characters here in the corner are almost missed in this illustration. I actually didn't see it the first time I looked at it. The next thing I want to take a look at is a submission by one of the patrons on Patreon, Sean Northridge. Sean is a great artist, and he's been part of the Patreon Action Line Army for quite some time, and he's working on his own comic. And he's doing a great job here. These illustrations are very nicely done. He's got a scene up here split in the 3 panels, and then transitioning to an outside shot inside this truck. So it's very nicely done. But he asked me to go over line art a little bit and how you might approach that and some tips on that. And I'm going to be covering several things. But one of the things that I want to cover today in this video, the 2 things I want to cover is line weight and line variance. Next video, I might get into some spot blacks and texture. Okay, so line weight would mean, similarly, if you were to grab your micron pen, most of you know what that is, and it's, say, a 03 pen, and you outline the entire thing with just that, okay? And you're going to get something that looks a lot like this, okay? Where you've gone over it with nice clean lines with a micron pen, and that's what you have, right? This is very similar to what we looked at on the previous page, where there's just line art. There's no real weight to it yet. So the first stage is to vary up the thickness of the lines, particularly the outlines, things that are closer to us to things that are farther away. So here I've added that line weight on these two characters alone. I've also gone in and not done just the contour, because if you do just the contour, what I mean by the contour is that you're just doing this line out here, but you're leaving these lines in here next to his arm and whatnot still very thin, then you end up with a very stickered look. I'll try to show you that real quick, where I don't go over the head or the interior lines, I just do the outside lines. And it still adds a sense of dimension, but it can also get to feeling like it's sort of just a sticker. Okay, so that by itself is not enough. You want to consider the contours of things. So here you can see I've done the contour of both of their arms, the inside contour of her head, and this hand here. I've even broken up a little bit heavier line weight right here to separate her body from his, and even a little bit where the shirts end. Okay, it just sort of ties everything together and makes it look like all of the lines are getting thicker, not just the contours. But primarily what you're looking for when you're creating a sense of depth is these kinds of things right here. Let's see if I can zoom in. On this character, on this character here, we have these thick, bold outlines, and then the line behind it on the cabinet, let me zoom in extra far here, is very thin. And there's a nice separation in depth between those. This becomes important when things start to kind of align themselves together. You can see here the inside line of his collar is about the same width as the lines of this cabinet, right? But because we have this contour, it breaks it, okay? Now, real quick, I want to point this out. Occasionally when you're drawing, you're going to create tangents. And this right here is what we call a tangent, where the top of his head is resting right on the edge of that line. Now, in this particular case, it's not a huge deal in that I don't feel like, you know, it's an optical illusion. I don't feel like it's detracting from the image at all, but still, it's a generally good practice to try and change those lines up so that they overlap instead of sitting right on top of each other. So instead, I'm going to draw this line like so. Okay, and now it breaks across the top like that, and just works a little bit better. Okay, so that is an example of line weight, particularly useful when you have things that are in front of each other. Okay. Now the second thing that I want to talk about is line variance. Line variance are lines that taper from thick to thin. All the lines that you see right here, right now, are all the same width. This line going through here stays the same thickness. This thin line here stays the same thickness. Even though they're different weights, they are still the same thickness. So it's the equivalent of using a 0.3 for all the interior lines and then going back over it with like a 0.5 or 0.8 micron pen. It's still going to be relatively the same width. Line variance has to do with changing the thickness of those lines. So let's turn that off, put our background on, and then I'm going to put the lines over the top of it that I used line variance. So here you can see that the lines are varying in thick to thin. Like for instance right here on her shorts, you can see that the line gets thicker here. Oops, I'm on the wrong layer. There we go. It's thicker. One more time. There we go. Got it. So line variance is something like this. It's thin and then thick and then thin again. Okay. I'm not great at this, but it's something that I try to practice all the time. And I did this pretty quick, but the lines in the background are all man-made, things that are manufactured by man. And that's really where I like to distinguish the two. Organic lines, or what I call organic lines, are things that have more line variance. They're going to have more tapered lines and more erraticness to them, and they are things that are generally found naturally. Things like hair, foliage, clothes, anything like that. Whereas inorganic lines are going to be things that are man-made, things like furniture or buildings or cars or vehicles. And so that's another way to separate the two things, okay? So here I've gone through and I've created some line variance. You can see here when I'm doing this digitally, my brush is set on pressure sensitivity. So if I press lightly, I get a thin line. If I press hard, I get a thick line. And this allows me to vary those lines up very quickly. Now, what I haven't really gotten into yet is any kind of feathering or texture or anything like that. I'm just focused on the thickness and thinness of the lines and then tapering those lines. If you can do those two things, they will add quite a bit to your artwork and really make them pop off the page and start to add a lot of depth to them, okay? Another thing that you can think about when you're doing line art is that you can actually add a hint of light source to your line art. So in this drawing, I've already begun doing that, where underneath of this arm, you can see that the line is rather thick, and I'm going to thicken that up under here as well. I'm trying to thicken up all the lines that are on the underside because I've established that the light is on top. I know that later on I'll probably go through and fill in some of these areas, back here as well. But for just the line art alone, I can start to create that sense of depth by creating heavier lines on the bottom sides of everything. So underneath his chin, it's got a heavier line. Underneath his collar, it's got a heavier line. The bottom side of his arms, the bottom side of her arms. Underneath of her shorts, depending on how loose they are, right, are going to cast a shadow, right? So practice with that. If you have light coming from different directions, your line art is going to change a little bit, okay? So that's really where I want to stop right there, is kind of with that. I would say, like, coming to this table right here, you could probably add a little bit of this here and there, but you don't want to overdo it because you don't want it to compete with your main characters here. So you might put a little bit underneath of here just to start to add that. You're probably going to put some dark under here because we're seeing under the table. So you want to be careful. You can see here that as I start adding more weight to this, I'm going to start competing with this if I make the lines too thick. So I'm mostly just focusing on little spot areas, trying to keep it toned down a little bit, okay? All right, that's it for this video. Next video, I'm going to get into texturing and spot blacks to help expand the line art and really take it to the next level. Sean, thank you for submitting your artwork. It looks great. I look forward to seeing what you do with the finished line art. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more, please consider hitting that like button or joining Patreon. Your support on Patreon helps me work on these videos and supports independent comic creation. So you can check out that Patreon at patreon.com/Action Line Studios. Thanks so much. Take care and have a great day.